Hi, this is Scott. I really appreciate our sponsors because they make the show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Developer Express. Become a UI superhero with Dev Express controls and libraries. Deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today. By leveraging your existing knowledge, you can build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. You can download your free 30-day trial at dx.hanselminutes.com. That's dx.hanselminutes.com.
From hanselminutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 562. In this episode, Scott talks with U.S. Air Force veteran Jerome Hardaway about Vets Who Code.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, we're talking with Jerome Hardaway from Veterans Who Code, vetswhocode.io. How are you, sir?
Hey, how are you doing? Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were in the Air Force, right?
Yes, sir. I was in the United States Air Force, Security Forces, and a part of the Phoenix Raven program.
And how long were you in?
I was in for about 5 years and 10 months.
Mm-hmm. And was that something where you had a career and then you joined the Air Force and then you left, or did you go straight in from school?
I went straight in from high school. I was initially going to go to college. Turned around, decided that I wanted to go to the Air Force and see what type of opportunities were there for me. Most of my family, they've served, so I wanted to do my part before I went on and did the rest of my life as well.
Mm-hmm. Is that really a common path for folks to go in right out of high school?
Yes. There's enlisted, which is most people either go right out of high school or with some college. But to be an officer, it's not like how it was in World War I and World War II, where you can where they could like make you an officer even if you were enlisted. You have to have a degree for that to become a company grade officer.
Mm-hmm. And when folks come out, so like I'm imagining you're in high school, you do your high school, you consider your different options, you go into the Air Force, you do 5-6 years, and then do people stay in for the rest of their lives, or do they come out and say, all right, now I will go into college with my GI Bill money?
For 50% of the military now, that answer is they get out the military and try to go to school or try to pursue other things. Right now, the military and like marriage has the same divorce rate as we like to say. About 50%. Yeah, about 50% of all people get divorced. About 50% of all people that enter the military get out of their first term. So
interesting. Okay. And how long is the term?
First term can go anywhere from 4 to 6 years. You're considered a first term veteran if you are first term veteran, I guess would be the best way to say it, if you're any branch for only 4 years. So that's usually what that's how the military does it, is 4 years, and the 8-year mark, then the 10-year mark those are all like big deals in the military. Then 20 years, and you can retire after 20.
So when you come out and it's like, all right, I'm going to go get a job, let's say, then you put on your suit and you start doing interviews. When people look at your resume and they see that you're in the military, what does the hiring manager think? Do they think this person had a very important job for 5 years, or do they think do they imply that that's a gap and that's not valuable time?
First and foremost, the first thing is you'd be amazed how many veterans don't even own a suit when they get out the military. The transitional process of getting out of the military to the becoming a member of civilian society is extremely broken. We have what is called a TAPS program, but outside of the most extensive part of it is prepping to get you out of the military system. and not prepping you for your new life. On average, it's about 2 to 3 days. I've heard they're getting better, but I know when I was in years ago, it was 1 day. And one of our veterans told me that like it lasted maybe 4 days at his base. So, the transition assistance programs are, there's not a lot of money or time invested in it. And usually it's somebody who, they served 20 years in the military. And then after they got out, they took over the transition assistance program as a civilian. So a lot of times you're learning about transitioning out of the military for somebody who, was a lifer in the military, and then their transition into the civilian sector was taking a government job with the military, and that's like their second job that they've ever had. So that's the first hurdle that we usually see as veterans, so that we encounter. Second hurdle is most people, even though you see how big the military is, when you think of that in correlation to the United States, about 1% of all people have served and in our country. So as a result, most people, when you come to hiring managers, they have no idea how to read a military resume. So the second big hurdle is doing resume interview prep for veterans, just so we can show those transferable skills to civilian hiring managers and hiring partners. So outside of those two big hurdles, that leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation by hiring managers, by civilians, a lot of people in general. That's why you see most veterans, they try to go back in a government service, but in another format, because those are like the only jobs or careers that really understand them. Or if they join the military, they automatically, they understand what you've gone through. So it's not by choice.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about different kind of analogies to put it. There's so many different ways to look at it. You're in another world, in another very insular dimension. You know what I mean?
I would compare it to the bubble effect that people are talking about these days. Like the military is its own little bubble. When I was in, I had no idea. About the recession until August 13th of 2009. And that's the Friday that I was out of service. And then I was getting into the civilian world, and I just happened to be watching news that afternoon and heard something about the recession. And mind you, the recession had been going on since 2007. I had been literally yes, I'm 2 years behind the rest of the world on what's going on. So I'm like, that is how the military is. It's almost like a world within its own self. The ecosystem is really small. It's really tight. A lot of the things that you're doing are already provided for you, especially if you're a young troop, young veteran. A lot of things you don't have to leave the base or installation for. And if you're in a career like I was, it had a high deployment rate, you didn't really have to, you really didn't have that time to be that outside of things that really require your job paying attention to. You didn't have the time to pay attention to stuff like CNN. My wife today makes fun of me because ever since I was like 19, 20, I was watching CNN for global affairs and like issues that happen like that.
So this bubble, I'm thinking of all the other bubbles that are out there that someone could be in. You could be in academia and then come out of academia. You can be in the military and come out. You could be in the nonprofit sector, or like you said, working for the government. It's very different than the private sector. And it sounds like people are coming out with a kind of a, hey, good luck. Here's some pamphlets. Good luck.
That's literally what we're seeing. It's getting better, but it's not getting better as fast as, when you look at the numbers, 250,000, no, I believe it's 25,000. I'm sorry. 25,000 troops are leaving the service every year. So that's 25,000 new people that are needing transition assistance, trying to get jobs, trying to learn skills every year. It's pretty horroring numbers when you think of it.
Mm-hmm. So I assume that there are veterans that are in tech. There were veterans who are coding as part of their jobs, but you said you were in security services. So I assume that other than checking email and Skyping home, there's not a lot of time to be like keeping up on what's going on in the tech industry.
Yes and no. My last job was B-Dot controller, which was really tech heavy in the military. Yeah, basically it was in charge. I was in charge of a lot of security devices as well as equipment to make sure that everybody could communicate effectively in case of missions. Like we were outside of the person who's in charge of the entire flight or team, which is around 52 people, who was they're called the flight sergeant, and the flight commander, who's the officer in charge. The B-Dot controller is beneath them, and so I was basically 3IC, making sure that everything was that our team was taking care of the installation correctly.
So how are you keeping up on what's going on in the world of tech? You just reading blogs and reading the news and
well, for
Verge?
me, no, that wasn't Verge. I did a lot of I was Googling what happened. I had the tech bug bite me around 2006. I had a roommate in Korea who they were in tech, so they actually worked on servers on the installation in South Korea. So so picking his brain every once in a while, seeing what he was doing, really had me intrigued. So that's how part of it started. The other part of it was basically, like you said, when I came out, that's what I started doing, was devouring every book, piece of literature that I could think of around 2010, especially when it came to SQL, SQL. That was like my first serious language and serious job.
So you had then, at what point did you see an advertisement for code.org?
It was around 2010, the same time. Yeah. That's when I saw that advertisement, and that's when I started devouring everything about code. Like I said, I worked as a TWIC analyst for the Department of Homeland Security Services, or whatever it's called. I don't even remember these days. Everybody's name is changing. And part of that was doing a lot of SQL as their analyst and handling people's security clearances so they can get on waterways and things of that nature. So that was my first technical job, because it was a lot of SQL involved, a lot of search queries, things of that nature. Then as I moved on, I took a break because my aunt, she ended up getting really ill. So I came home from my last duty station to come back to my hometown, Memphis, to help her. And after about a year, I was trying to get back into the field, started working in a nonprofit and helping that nonprofit with its tech and digital marketing. And then before I realized it, I had my own crazy situation. It fell in my lap to where I would end up having to start Vetsu Code.
Do you think that your story is a typical one, that everyone who is a vet should get on Code Academy and code.org, or don't you think that there's people who have that inner fire that they can self-learn, that autodidact where it's like, I want to learn this on my own? Or do you think most people need some framework within which they should work?
I do not think people need a framework when they work. I think people can do whatever works for them. I heard about code.org. I did HTML and CSS on Code Academy, but then I moved right to SQL, and they never had an SQL course until 2015, 2016, or something like that. And I never, so I started using a lot of books, a lot of Googling, self-learning, doing everything I could to learn SQL. So the same with JavaScript and PHP. So I think veterans, we have that unique tenacity where I think there's the misconception is that we have everything handed to us, where people don't understand that, we regularly deploy without all the tools needed to do our job due to pricing, price cuts, things of that nature, where the military is trying to save money. And we're, innate problem solvers, because if you're in a, third world country and the whole goal is to come back home in one piece for Christmas, you have to figure out the best way to solve problems that you may not always have the best tools for. And what I'm seeing when we find the veterans that we help with Vetsuko, a lot of these veterans, they have done a lot of self-study on their own, and they're at a sticking point. So there's there are several veterans that gone through. We're like, on average with our data, we're about the third resource that they've used after they've either hit a sticking point or they've expended all of their other resources to learning how to code. Then they come find us. You'd be amazed how about 70% of the people who we accept, they already have GitHubs and they've already been pushing.
Really?
Yes, trying to learn how to code, things of that nature. They're go-getters, and those are the people we look for vets who code. We are not community-based. I take our partners seriously. I take our donors very seriously, and I want to find that best talent for us, so that way we can focus on finding really talented people who they deserve this opportunity to learn how to program and learn and have access to really cool partners and really cool resources and help them. They just, what things that may be standing in their way are things like, they have a family, or one individual, his stepson is really ill. Another individual, she was working, she's a spouse, and she's working with her family, but her husband's overseas. So we find these people who are talented, they just need help, and they may not be close to, a big code school city or something like that. And we take them and we train them and we help them get jobs. And we focus on a lot of open source technologies to get that done.
Mm-hmm. So where does open source come in? Because you described basically all the things you're using, PHP and Ruby and JavaScript and Python. Was it significant that you didn't have to go and register for something and download a commercial project? Like, is open source fundamental to what you do in your learning process?
Yes, it's one of the most important, like open source. The open source community is like a lifesaver of a lot of, not just myself or Vets Who Code, but a lot of programs and in general, because that community can make, they make some of the best products for learning how to code. Some of the products are better than commercial. Like, we were just on Twitter talking about this earlier this morning in regards to how a book that's usually recommended for beginner programmers is actually a horrifying book if you're a beginner programmer trying to learn JavaScript. It's like it's the scariest book ever. Yeah. And we were talking how, like, JS for Kids is a better book, or if you didn't want to, Node School, which is free and open source, is a great resource, and the Mozilla tutorial, that's like amazing. That their tutorials are beautiful in regards to JavaScript. So that's one of the biggest thing about these organizations that focus on open source community, like the Node community, the Ruby on Rails community. They really, if you wanted to learn how to program, especially the speed that JavaScript's going and the capabilities that you have with Ruby and Ruby on Rails, those are some of the best open source products out there on the web, and you can learn so much with just investing time in the product.
Someone brought up a really interesting phrase to me recently that I knew but hadn't really absorbed, and they said that we can teach people to code, but we're not teaching them digital literacy. What do you think about that? Someone said, you type in CNN.com and you hit enter, and then a miracle happens and the page renders. How deep do people have to go? How intuitive do these things have to be? Can you go and teach someone Node without teaching them about IP addresses and FTP and things like that? Or where does that fit in?
Negative. You need to know how to deploy an app. And for us, we teach Capistrano. We talk about FTP, things of those nature, things of that nature. But yeah, you need to learn how to do this stuff. I would compare that to how veterans are trained when it comes to learning their, everybody uses it now, the M4 carbine. When it comes to the weapon of choice to train on the range. You have to know that weapon forwards and backwards. You have to know which type of rounds it can use, whether it's 5.56 or 7.62, or using fiber optic night scopes, or if you're using IR night scope, or if you're going to be using an iron sight, you got to know the weight. You have to know all this, how many rounds per minute, things of that nature. You have to be able to take it apart, put it together, the equivalent of troubleshooting it in case something happens.
Okay. You have to. So you're saying that You're saying the brains are wired this way already. It's like, okay, I need to know all these little details, and I have to be very regimented and very focused, and recognize how things are put together and take them apart and put them back together again. So you're saying the military brain is set up for this kind of work already.
It's not, I wouldn't say set up. I would say that they force you they ram that type of knowledge.
Okay. That's another, I wouldn't say it that way, but you get to.
Yeah, I was there. So it was either learn this stuff or do push-ups. And you can only do so many push-ups.
Maybe we need to do code school like that. More push-ups.
That would be, I don't know how people at for-profit code schools would like that, but I think it'd be fun.
One of the things that I'm passionate about is trying to use the privileges that I have to, as my friend Anwan says, to lend that privilege to others. And I know that you're passionate about helping underprivileged communities. Would you plug veterans that are coming out into the world of coding as being underprivileged, or how wide does that word go for you?
I think underprivileged and underrepresented unrepresented is a word I would use for veterans. If you have no further look at look at where veterans are in Congress or even in your community, a lot of veteran issues and veterans in general, especially when you get out, it's an uphill battle because you don't have that advantage of relationships. All you have is your service, and hopefully you are a Marine and you were like how my Marine bros are. They can live the rest of their lives easy peasy because they're Marines. So they can just say, I'm a Marine. And we have a joke about how a Marine and an Army Ranger and a airborne troop all walk into a bar, and we know that because, they told us in the first 2 minutes. And it's like in the civilian sector, that would be your CrossFitter and your vegan. So like those guys, they tend to be okay, but it still is a very underrepresented community in the civilian sector.
So do you think that the way that we're moving in the state of tech inclusion is getting better, and this will help veterans, that now that we're aware that and I'll use the word diversity in a broad sense, that different kinds of people from different kinds of backgrounds make for a better team, that we should be considering veterans for our projects because it's going to make for a better product?
Yes and no. It's really difficult for me to answer that question because I see multiple different communities, and there are some communities that are like just on the ball. When you go to New York or you go to San Francisco or Atlanta, those communities, they are, they're serious. They're taking tech inclusion, be it minorities, women, veterans, very serious. And you see some communities that they're not taking it as serious, but you also have to realize about the money generators and things of that nature in those communities. For instance, in my hometown, because healthcare and transportation are the main two financial generators in the city, outside of tourism, no one really cared unless you're going to do like a Java or ASP.NET type program, things of that nature. And when it comes to inclusion, a lot of things when it comes to inclusion were falling through the cracks, and they just weren't as effective. Where I just came from Facebook on veterans during Veterans Day week, and they were just so on the ball when it comes to tech inclusion, particularly in veterans, that I was like, I don't even know why I need to be here and why you guys invited me here to talk about this stuff. Really? Yeah, like they had a guy from NASA there. Like they just hired this guy he's been there for like a month prior to like the event, and his job for NASA, he was Air Force and worked at NASA. His job was putting satellites in the freaking sky, and that's what he did. Like I put things in space, and that's what he does for Facebook. He puts things in space. I'm like, wow, I totally you don't Facebook is so huge and there's so many different moving parts of it that you don't even think of jobs like that. And hey, you can work at Facebook and put things in space. So they're hiring people from NASA. So if you ever want to move to California and you're in NASA, you should look at Facebook. So I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some NASA scientist that hits me up now and be like, yo, stop poaching our people.
That just makes me feel, though, that having different people from different places is useful. Like, having people with degrees, having people without degrees, having scientists that can go to space, who knows, all kinds of flavors of people.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's, I think the inclusion and the diversity of having different people of thoughts and ethnicities, backgrounds, that's what makes a great community and a great product. Those are the two things that people really I think that's one of the big things that the civilian community doesn't do well versus the military community, because we're all unified on one course when we're inside the military, inside our military bubble. A lot of that stuff, especially when you're overseas, a lot of the more bureaucratic or first world problems that, just irks people, we don't stress about. And we start getting more attuned to that, more empathetic about that as we come back home and we start reintegrating back to society. But because of all my deployments and things of that nature, I remember when I first came home, it took years for me to start understanding what was a big deal for certain things when it came to, civilians. Like my wife, she would tell you, she would come home and she would tell me how bad her day was. And my idea was, did anyone die? And then she'd be like, well, no. And then I'd turn back around and get back to coding. I was like, in my world, no loss of limb, no loss of eyesight, no loss of life, everything's good. So, but I've changed. I've gotten older and wiser and smarter. Because I'm trying to stay married.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure, but did you die is probably not what my wife wants to hear. One thing that makes me think of, though, is when someone gives an order, when there's a chain of command and someone gives an order, is there any debate? Is there any here's another way I could think we could do that,
Yes.
Because that's very common in the coding environment, right?
Yes, that's very you can do that. A lot of people, like I said, a lot of people's ideas of how the military is operated comes from MASH and things of that nature, where you're just you just follow orders, or just the shows that show only basic training. No, you can question orders if you have good reason. It's against the UCMJ to follow unlawful orders. So, for instance, if you get an order and you are under question that this is unlawful, you don't have to follow that order. And I've seen people fight that all the way up to the Pentagon. And you can always suggest different ways as well. That's what makes great leadership. They understand, the military leaders, they understand that there's more than one way to solve a problem and create solutions. So they're not against younger, more junior troops understanding this. But from my own personal experience, I never forget when we were leaving Camp Bucca, Iraq, and we were all waiting for the NCOs to come up with a plan or how we're going to get all our bags off this convoy and into these connexes so they could be shipped home. And there were 6 of them, and they were just still debating. And I just got up and I walked to the to convoy, got up on an 18-wheeler, started taking bags, taking them off. They looked at me, and then they went back to talking. Well, 15 minutes later, another airman came up to me and they were like, well, I'm going to help you because you seem to be the only one that's doing something. 30 minutes later, I had an entire fire team with me, and I had actually realized that I was taking a leadership decision role in getting our gear ready to go home while the tech sergeants were in support. So things like that. I mean, in people's ideas of what would have happened on TV, I would have gotten yelled at, I would have gotten chewed out. I'm like, no, that didn't happen at all. People started helping because I was the only person taking action. I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to start building, and then I'm going to start solving and working on the problem, and then I'll figure it out as I go, which is very much like how programming is. And if that's what most people do, let me build something. Then as I get a problem, let me research it, let me think it better. Your first program is not a beautiful piece of art. That's one of the things that we tell our troops is never delete your first program, because it's going to be crappy, but you are going to learn to appreciate that 5-10 years down the road. You're not talking, you're not thinking about epics and user stories and, all of these things that are TDD. Like, no one cares about test-driven development when they first learn how to code. It's only as you get more senior, more into like, I have to say more into like the professional grade of programming where,
exactly.
You have to think about what we say, the three users. You have to think about the user that's your boss, the user that's going to come after you eventually and look at this code, and the user who's the consumer. And the second user, you have to treat the user that's going to come and look at your code like a psychopath that knows where you live. So that's where you start thinking about that stuff. But outside of that, you're just doing stuff and solving problems and putting out fires as it goes along. I'm pretty sure Facebook was like that when it was getting made in some kid's dorm, and Twitter was like that. And we already know the Twitter story didn't get off the ground the first 2 times, and before it became what it is today. So that's how the military is run. You're there to solve a problem, and to solve a problem with the least amount of pain as possible, or least amount of time. Like, that's what we want to do, because in the end, we all just want to get home and go back to like playing video games, just like normal people, just like civilians
just
do.
Like normal people.
Yeah, we're no different. We want to play our video games, eat barbecue, sleep in. Well, not sleep in. I'm not gonna lie about that. I hate sleeping in. So that gets me in trouble a lot too.
So people can learn about Vetsu Code at vetsucode.io. It's been around since 2014, and it's a nonprofit, so they can donate. It's tax deductible.
Yes, sir, it is.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jerome Hardaway, for talking with me today.
Roger that. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.